Hey guys, it's Defoffalizer here, and here for another theory. Well anyway, what I'd like to start off by saying is that I love The Cave. It's a great game, it's a pretty good puzzle game, has a lot of interesting concepts in it, and one of my favorite characters in any video game. Psst, it's The Cave himself, that's my favorite. But with all that said, another interesting thing about it is it might actually depict the 7 deadly sins in the form of the 7 main characters. Yep, those 7 deadly sins. But before I match each character up with each sin, I think I should go over the plausibility of this actually being the case. You see, one of the things that inspired me to make this video was Noggin's video on the 7 Koopalings being based off the 7 deadly sins, and it was bad. Like, really freaking bad. Like, if I was including him on my game theory list, this video would be at number 3. That's not to say I hate Noggin, I just think that this is by far the worst video he's ever made. But I digress. A game doesn't have to be ultra heavy on symbolism like Okami, God of War, or to a lesser extent The Binding of Isaac for religious symbolism to still be there. Heck, there are even rumors that the main characters in SpongeBob were based off of the 7 deadly sins. I don't know if that's true or not though. I mean, at the beginning of the game, The Cave actually does hint at that the 7 main characters might be representations of the darknesses within everyone.
I have a really interesting story to tell you this evening, so pay attention. It's a story of 7 people and a glimpse into a dark place in each of their hearts. But be careful before you judge. There is a dark place in your heart as well. Someday you will find yourself descending my depths in search of what you desire. And you might not like what you find either.
I mean, there are 7 characters in the game. The stuff they did in the past was definitely sinful, and someone always ended up dead at the end of it, so that fills in all 3 words of the 7 deadly sins. Okay, now it's time to connect each character to each sin. Okay, let's start with probably the easiest one to nail down on this list, the scientist. Her sin is obviously greed. She makes a new discovery and ends up selling it to a bunch of people. However, the person with the biggest offer happens to be someone willing to weaponize it, and she ends up succumbing to her greed and selling it, causing a nuclear pandemic or something along those lines. It never says what it is that she discovered, but it shows you loading up a nuclear warhead in her level, so it's probably not good. Another really obvious one is the time traveler. Her sin? Envy. Basically, a guy gains the greatest employee of all time award, which she felt she deserved, so in order to right this wrong, she went back to kill one of his ancestors to make sure he was never born. However, that ancestor turned out to be a caveman, so yeah, you can imagine how many people she stopped from existing. Next up, the hillbilly. His sin? Lust. Basically, he works as a carnival, and he falls in love with, as the cave put it, two-legged lady, and did anything in his power to get his hands on her. However, when it turned out she had no interest in him, he felt a burning rage of rejection and burned down the theme park as well as many other theme parks. Then there's the adventurer, who her sin is pride. Basically, she works with a team of adventurers, but she hogs all the glory. But when her teammates cast her out for being all full of herself, she plots to kill them. Next up, the monk. His sin? Wrath, or rage. Basically, as a monk, he completely fails in his training, and as he gets older and older, the rage of being terrible builds and builds until he eventually kills his master. Okay, but now here's where things really start to get complicated. Basically, we're left with 2, well, technically 3 characters, and 2 sins that don't exactly match up to them. Sloth and gluttony. Basically, the knight, his story is that he's not actually a knight, he's a peasant who got up in a knight's armor after he had a heart attack, and goes on, but doesn't actually help the kingdom and just reaps the rewards of it. And this eventually leads to the entire kingdom being destroyed and him being killed. I guess you could consider his sin sloth because he reaps the rewards of what he does without actually doing anything, but really it ties in more to dishonesty rather than laziness. But I think the real problem here is the twins. Basically, they try to kill their parents because they don't want to listen to rules anymore, which I don't think ties into any of the sins in the 7 deadly ones. Granted, the cave mentions that they will have freedom from chores, which could tie to sloth again, but that's clearly not what this is about. So I guess the game's not really about the 7 deadly sins, but rather just the dark place in people's hearts that causes them to do terrible things. And one thing that I find kind of weird about this is that for the horrible things these characters do, some come out on top and others don't. The hillbilly, the twins, the time traveler, and the knight all have terrible things happen to them at the end of the game if they go down the dark route. However, the monk, the scientist, and the adventurer don't and actually come out on top. It's very weird. But there's another thing I forgot to mention about this game. Notice how I just said if you go down the darker path. Well, that's because there is a good ending for all these characters. If you return your object of desire to the gift store clerk, who, by the way, if we were still on the symbolism train, I could compare to Satan because he tempts them with their object of desire, just like Satan tempted Adam and Eve with the forbidden fruit. But if you return it to him, you actually get the good ending for each of these characters. Basically, in these endings, the characters stop doing the dark actions they were about to do, and everything ends up working out. Twins apologize to their parents and stop trying to kill him. The hillbilly finds a new girl. The scientist rips up the military contract and decides not to use her technology for weaponized purposes. The knight admits that he was a fraud. The adventurer makes up with her teammates. The monk finds a new way to inner peace. And the time traveler congratulates the guy who won greatest employee in the world. But one last thing I think the cave does that makes it unique about portraying the dark depths of someone's mind and what lengths they'll go to get what they want, that makes it unique other than the fact that it gives people the option to take the good path, but also the fact that it's a fairly comedic game. It's not all uber serious or uber dark. Okay, granted, it is technically a pretty dark game, but you know, it's a funny game. It does it in a funny way and not just the cave's sarcastic comments. Also just general humor all around. I am Defoffalizer, and before I go, there's one very important thing I feel I need to mention. This was not meant to be a religious video, just pointing out the religious symbolism in a game that turned out not even to be there. So please, no religious debates in the comments. I have to deal with game theory debates, now religious ones too. Just please no religious debates in the comments. Please!